Welcome to Monday Night Muscle Masters!
The video game wrestle show comprised entirely of sweat, steroids, and swerves. I'm your host, the venerable McMuscles, and we have a scintillating night of action in store for you tonight as I flex and flaunt my way through every grappling game in existence. But I'm not just playing them. Oh no. This subgenre was extremely important to me growing up, probably too important, and I remain passionate about it to this day. Did I say passionate? I mean salty. Salty that we haven't had a good one in years, but let's not get off track. So what is on tonight's card for Muscle Masters? Well, I'll be reviewing a wrestling classic, and you'll all applaud and cheer at the appropriate time. 'Cause if you don't, I'll just tamper with the audio so your boos will sound like cheers. That's a real thing that happens. So, if we're gonna throw down tonight, we might as well start from the best possible position, and more specifically, WCW vs. NWO Revenge. But first, a bit of history. That's better. The first game that ran under this unique engine was Aki's own Virtual Pro Wrestling on the PlayStation, which eventually got localized as WCW vs. the World, a game that's worth talking about for precisely the remaining length of this sentence. For those of you without a refined palette of wrestling gameplay systems, let's take a closer look. Closer? No, though that's too close. Now, Aki Engine games are played from a sort of overhead, almost three-quarter perspective of the ring. And not gonna lie, another main hallmark of this series is that the character models usually look like hot garbo. But, you know, it's not about that. It's about how you fight those hot garbo men. Or pretend to fight them, or whatever. The basics. You have a grapple button, a strike button, and other amazing actions like running, blocking, and countering. Tap the grapple button and lock up. Then do a move by pressing a direction on the D-pad, which results in trainee maneuvers like snapmares, body slams, and etc. But hold the grapple button down, you've initiated a strong grapple. Wow! Now you can pull off power bombs, pile drivers, and Canadian destroyers if you're trying to get yourself over. This principle also carries over to strike somewhat, as you can have weak and strong variations on your kicks and punches depending on how long you hold the button down. This simple system of quicker maneuvers being harder to counter versus strong attacks being easier is what gives the Aki Engine its stupid deep depth while still being easy to pick up and play. However, it was only until WCW vs. NWO World Tour hit the N64 with quad player action where the Aki Engine really started to take off. And, you know, the fact that WCW was in the only hot period it ever had certainly didn't hurt. However, one thing both these early entries in the Aki series suffered from was a lack of personality and recognizable WCW hallmarks. Now, by hallmarks, I don't mean, short-sighted bookings, strong undercards, or pandering to ex-WWF wrestlers, but I kind of mean rather the pay-per-view sets, the match stips, music, and the logos. Since all the previous titles were just localized Japanese games with a rather paltry selection of WCW performers thrown on top, Aki's third effort, WCW vs. NWO Revenge, was its first concentrated American effort, so it had a lot to build off of. Featuring a much expanded roster, lots of refined gameplay changes, and up in the ante with the glitz and glam of WCW style presentation, does Revenge still hold up today?
I don't know!
Well, logically, we gotta start with the most important part of any grapple game, the roster.
Boo!
Well, what? You don't agree that that's the most important part? Well, just ask this wrestletician. He'll tell you that you're wrong. Now, let's just see who we're gonna be pushing tonight. First, cast your minds back to 1998.
Hold one! Arm drag!
The hand did something. That's hot coffee.
Hold two! Arm bar!
Going for something. Hogan's got something.
Hold three! The moss-covered, three-handle family grudunzel!
We are deep into the raging maelstrom that is the Monday Night Wars, and the wrestlers available in Revenge reflect that as much as legally possible, which is the best type of possible. Everyone is grouped by stable, so let's take a jaunt through the paddocks and get a gander of the teeth of who you'll be grappling with tonight. First up, NWO Black and White is represented with Mr. Gawker Lawsuit himself, Terry Bollea. The bad guy, Scott Hall. Mama's boy, Buff Bagwell. And the big bad booty daddy, Scott Steiner.
WCW! Get kiss!
It's also bolstered by legendary superstars like Bryan Adams and Scott Norton. Then we have the much cooler, but let's face it, completely outmanned NWO Wolfpack, which is made up of Big Daddy Cool, The Crow, Bonesaw, Conan the Barbarian, and finally, and most importantly, Sexy Lexi himself. His t-shirt is,
And your t-shirts are too tight too, Billy!
Following that, we have a noticeable downgrade as the unwashed scent of Raven's flock wafts through the Bowery. This group is comprised of the losers from Raven's flock. Although, massive shoutouts for including Lodi, though. Someone I had no recollection of until right now. Next, we have 4 pages of just WCW wrestlers. Usually the most talented guys on the roster who are never pushed as much as they should have, and now I'm sad. We have the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, Ray the Mysterious Sr., the Ultimo Dragon, La Parka, Sub-Zero, the Excellence of Execution, Chris King Booker, Gilbert, and Ronda Rousey's dad, I guess. I don't know, this whole thing confuses me. And finally, it's me, it's DDP. But even more finally, there's Eddie Guerrero. He's featured, but for whatever reason, his first name is misspelt, I think. I don't know, WCW liked the D and the Y, and WWF preferred I-E, whatever. Rest in peace, bro. Following that, there's 2 pages of weirdo jobbers that are basically the movesets of notable Japanese performers, but completely overhauled in name and appearance. These, of course, include such luminaries as Dr. Frank, Maya Inca Boy, and Ming Chi. There's also a manager stable that's packed with greats like Dusty the American Dream Baby, Rick Rude, Jimmy Hart, and not such greats as Virgil. All in all, there's over 60 wrestlers in Revenge, and around this time frame, outside of maybe a Fire Pro, this was the biggest roster you could get. It also placed you in an incredibly specific band of time, as actual World Championship Wrestling would never have a roster this good again, and only lasted a few months. In 1998, you could have matchups like Bret Hart versus Chris Jericho, or Goldberg versus Chris, all on the same cartridge. In terms of WCW, what were your other options at this time? I mean, I guess you could drink a single lukewarm can of non-alcoholic beer and play WCW Nitro. Oops, yeah, let me sound sweeten that again. Hold on. That's better. Anyway, there's still some oddities and omissions in the roster here. Mummy's Alive himself, Ric Flair, was fired earlier in 1998 for no showing, I believe, a Thunder taping, but was then rehired back months later anyway. Thus, he was ineligible to be included in Revenge before the game launched, I guess. Whatever the case, his presence is sorely missed here since he was such a WCW mainstay throughout the 90s. A guy that you would figure I would like, Wrath, is also buried in the code and can be accessed via hacking, but it's unclear why he was taken out at the last minute. Conversely, Canyon/Mortis is in here, so I don't know, what's the deal? God, I always thought this tag team looked like such fucking money, which is a good reason why I should never own a wrestling company. Now, with all that out in the open, you'd have to be a loser if you ever complained about the lineup of Revenge, because it's about as accurate as you could get for 1998 WCW. However, if Ric Flair isn't in the game, and he's not, and you really want Ric Flair, you can just cobble your own Ric Flair together in the Create a Wrestler mode, right? Well, not quite. Now, when I say not quite, of course I just mean no. Gonna be transparent here. There is no character creation in WCW vs NWO Revenge at all. Yes, there is costume change, which lets you swap out costumes from one wrestler to another, but it's there for when faces turn heel, or heels turn face, which they do all the time. So, if you prefer NWO Stevie Ray to Harlem Heat Stevie Ray, or you'd rather have the Bulldog be the Bull Wolf, well then all your weird wrestling-based fetishes can come true in Revenge. Okay, so let's move on to the other modes, as the importance of this in wrestling games is mega important. Sure, the gameplay could be fun, but if there's not much to do, then there's not much to do. So we have an exhibition match, either single or tag, and that's it. You can fiddle with rules like no countouts, rope break, and the like, but this has as much pizzazz and is about as exciting as, say, Scott Norton. Next, we have Special Match, which is sadly about as special as Scott Norton. I'm so sorry, Scott. I don't even hate you. You're fine, honestly. You're unfortunately just the standard bearer for what was wrong with the NWO. There's two match types in Special Match, Battle Royale and Handicap, and we can just ignore Handicap off the bat. Strike that off the list. We'll not be covering it. Yeah, okay. Battle Royale, however, is an oversaturated and exploitive match type that's kind of damaging the video game industry. Battle Royal is a 4-player mode, right, where you can choose the amount of entrants and it all basically boils down to being a Royal Rumble. But you can turn on various winning conditions like pins, submissions, or over-the-top eliminations. You know, it's good, chaotic fun if you have multiple people to play with. Then lastly, there's Championship mode, which is basically the main thing you do in Revenge, as it sets in stone who will be your various champions. Let me explain. The mode lets you target a particular belt, ranging from the US Championship, Tag Team titles, Cruiserweight, World Heavyweight, and of course, the most prestigious and classy title of them all, the TV Championship. You go through a series of bouts against CPU-controlled opponents and beat them. You then get the belt, and your winning wrestler will appear on the menu of the title they just earned, and they'll do their little taunt. Yeah! Now, you do unlock a few wrestlers this way, like the BK Bomber, Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, I'm sorry, I mean the father of...
This'll be the moment, starting now, of the genesis of McGillicuddy.
And of course, the Rowdy Roddy Peeper. So there's at least a reason to tear through each championship to unlock these guys. And that's about it for the main single-player mode of Revenge. You know, honestly, it's still early in the life of 3D wrestling titles. There's no branching storylines yet, no cutscenes or voice acting, just a wholesome, down-to-earth arcade mode. So, match types, yeah, it's a bit disappointing. Look, I know WCW didn't have all that many gimmicks and stips at this point in time, but why no cage, no war games? Even the LJ and WWF 16-bit titles had cages. Now, in terms of gameplay itself, well, like I outlined earlier, this is the Aki Engine, so it's still immensely satisfying, but this version is lacking staples of later releases, and has a wrinkle or two that make it slightly worse. Striking grapples were a feature that started and ended in Revenge, which amounts to pressing a few buttons to release a flurry of kicks and strikes while the camera thinks it's being all dramatic and shit, showing off the action. The really slow action. No wonder this never carried over to future releases. Running grapples are also sorely absent here, so if you're familiar with stuff like No Mercy or Def Jam, not having that extra offensive option might be a turnoff. I know running grapples weren't created until later, but, fuck you. However, what Revenge did make great strides in was this was the first time Aki more closely replicated the finishers for each wrestler, as Kevin Nash just had really generic powerbombs up until this point, but Revenge was the one that rendered his signature jackknife with more detail than was probably even needed. Same goes for Jericho's Lion Tamer and Chris Ben's crossface. So when shove comes to bump, the game still holds up when it comes to the pure, refined sport of grappling. But the lack of gameplay modes and match types does bring it down a notch. I'm well aware that we are looking at a game from 1998, but I still feel that there were a few viable options that could have been thrown in for match types. With all that being laid out on the table, will WCW vs. NWO Revenge be the total package?
I don't know!
Undoubtedly, the allure here is the absolutely stacked roster, which is encapsulated in the fun and accessible Aki Engine. There's no other WCW game that had a roster like this, combined with an actual fun fighting system. So that in and of itself makes it a precious treasure you should, just shove down your jock so the ref doesn't see. Yes, the modes and match types are a bit lacking, but it's forgivable given the time. Speaking of music, the only recognizable tracks at all the game has is the Nitro theme, which only occurs during the replays of match-winning moves. Granted, that's pretty cool, but it's not great that important stuff like entrances are generally lacking in Revenge. Little things like the cartoon ref, Booker T doing the spin-a-rooney, La Parka starting the match off with a chair, the crowd chanting along with a 3 count, they're all nice touches, but I'd trade them all in for more elaborate entrances, even if they had to, resort to the animated GIF images from WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. That's so adorable. If WCW and THQ had gone to make one more game together, it would have easily been the definitive Atlanta-based wrestling video game adaptation, and the promotion still had a few more months of life left in them before, WWF crushed them in every quantifiable metric. What could have been if Aki was given one more shot. Even with all the negatives I've listed, Revenge still stands as the pinnacle of WCW-based video gaming. Well, what? What are you gonna say? Mayhem? Backstage assault? No, absolutely not. This is as good as it got for Billionaire Ted and the Bish. But fortunately, it's still a fun one to dust off and relive the time capsule that was 98 WCW.
Armbar!
So overall, what do I give Revenge? Well, from my patented and totally original scoring system, I awarded a hearty but not overwhelming 3 stars. No, I'm not gonna steal that thing. I'm gonna keep stealing the GamePro thing.
Oh yeah!
So, if you'd like to push one of your own boys or wrestling games for me to review, let me know in the comments below or shoot/work an email over to mattmcmuscles@gmail.com. This was Monday Night Muscle Masters, so for myself and the greatest production crew in the world, good night, everybody!
Trash, don't believe me. You millennials out there watching on TV right now, don't believe me. Go on your cell phone, YouTube. I'm world famous.